In the previous video, we introduced you to the practical steps for planning a monitoring mission, including how to prepare a deployment plan, how the composition of your monitoring teams should look like, and how to communicate with relevant authorities and assembly organizers. In this video, we are going to walk you through the observation indicators. These are all the pieces of information surrounding you when you are on the ground observing an assembly. This is the information that you should consider, note, and record. The purpose of recording the indicators is to enable monitors to reconstruct how the assembly unfolded when writing their assembly monitoring form after the event and analyzing the observation findings. The final report will usually be based on the observations of monitors positioned in different locations at the assembly. The process of recording your observations and drafting your monitoring report will be discussed in the next module. Observation indicators include information regarding the general description of the assembly, specific elements of the assembly, and policing of the assembly. You can download the observation indicators sheet from the reading materials section of this module. The first set of observation indicators relates to the general description of the assembly, which covers aspects such as the date and time, weather, venue or route of the assembly, participants, and format of the assembly. Time. We should carefully note down the date and time when the monitors arrive and start observing, the time they finish, the time at which the assembly begins and finishes, the chronology of the main elements of the event, and the time of any police actions. Weather. The weather usually affects the numbers of participants and their mood. It is also relevant to the use of certain law enforcement tactics. Note it down. Venue or route. We should make a note of the location of the assembly and describe the general environment at the time of arrival. We should also pay attention to any prominent buildings, significant structures, and potential danger areas associated with the assembly. If the assembly moves to a different location, monitors should also note the time of this change and route taken. Participants. We should also try to note the number of participants in the assembly, although this can be difficult as the numbers grow. Monitors should also attempt to assess any changes in participant numbers throughout the duration of the assembly. Format of the assembly. Lastly, we should note the format of the assemblies, as they can involve either static gatherings of people in a single space, the movement of crowds in a procession, or a combination of these. Some assemblies might also take the form of sit-in protests or involve people moving a short distance to deliberately block roads or impede the movement of others. The second group of observation indicators consists of the specific elements of the assembly, which we monitors should note down. Some of these include the composition of the crowd, presence of organizers, stewards, medical services, other monitors, media, key messages of the assembly, clothing, behavior, and mood of the participants, as well as possible incidents and counter-demonstrations. Here are some of the indicators we should pay attention to. Organizer. We should try to confirm that the assembly organizer is present at the assembly site and observe their interactions with other parties present, such as the police. Composition of the crowd. We should pay attention to the composition of the assembly participants, noting their age and gender and the presence of various groups such as minorities, persons with visible disabilities, or pregnant women. By doing so, we can gain relevant information to assess any good practices in facilitation of the assembly, but also possible restrictions on the freedom of peaceful assembly to some groups, including if the deployment of certain policing tactics could have a disproportionately negative effect on some assembly participants. Stewards. We should also pay attention to the presence or absence of stewards or other individuals who might be helping with the organization of the assembly or with crowd management. Monitors should try to count the numbers of stewards and should note and describe any visible forms of identification they are wearing. Medical services. We should try to identify if anyone is providing medical services and how many paramedics or other medical personnel are present. Take note of how they provide care for any sick or injured and how their work is being facilitated by law enforcement personnel. Other monitors and media. We should also take note of whether any other monitors are engaged in observing the assembly and whether any local, national, or international media outlets are present. In this regard, we should note how their work is facilitated or impeded, whether they have access to the assembly venue or route, and could record the actions of law enforcement personnel in an unhindered way. In addition to these, we should take note of the key messages of the assembly. Any statements or slogans with visual displays, which might include different types of flags or banners, posters, or placards. Any music being played and whether it is amplified, any songs or chants, or any abusive statements or slogans being shouted. Speeches to the participants that might serve to influence people's subsequent behavior and the mood of the assembly. Organizers and speakers might remind the participants to behave orderly, but if the messages conveyed during the assembly could amount to hate speech or incitement to violence, this should be recorded. Principle of sight and sound. We should also note if the assembly is facilitated in a way that its message can be seen and heard by the intended target audience. Behavior and mood of the participants. The nature of the event might also affect the atmosphere at the assembly or the mood of the participants. Some events feel calm and friendly, while the mood at others might be tense or hostile. Clothing or uniforms, masks or face coverings. We should pay attention to any distinctive items or clothing worn, particularly different uniforms, and also to the presence of people wearing masks or using other means that have the intention or effect of concealing identity. Spectators. The presence and location of spectators and passers-by should also be noted, as well as their interaction with assembly participants and with the police. Spectators might also change their attitudes over the duration of an assembly and display either support for or opposition to the aims of those participating. Counter-demonstrators. Some assemblies attract counter-demonstrations, which we should ideally also record. In particular, we should pay attention to the counter-demonstrators' key messages, behavior, and physical location in relation to the main assembly and in relation to the police. Monitors should also attempt to observe any interactions among counter-demonstrators, assembly participants, and the police. Conflict incidents. Lastly, throughout the course of the assembly, we should record any incidents observed, including forms of verbal abuse from the crowd or from opponents, attempts to disrupt the assembly, and acts of violence. In the case of such an incident, we should try to document the individual or group who perpetrated the act, the impact of the action, and any response thereof. The third group of observation indicators consists of the specific elements of the policing of the assembly, which we should note down as monitors. Police presence before and during various stages of the assembly. It is important to pay close attention to police numbers, their gender and diversity composition, their positioning, their actions throughout the duration of the event, as well as the vehicles they use. It is important to note differences in police uniforms, insignia, and badges as a means of identifying the specific units that are present at any event and the roles they have in the facilitation of the assembly. We should also note down if the police visibly wear individual identification tags, which is key for securing accountability. Also, it is important to note whether police are wearing protective clothing, riot gear, or ordinary soft uniforms. A swift change in the way that police officers are deployed, for instance, a sudden increase in the number of police officers or a change in the units deployed, can lead to a rise in tension. On-spot changes or restrictions to the assembly process. We should note whether the assembly could proceed in accordance with the organizer's plan, including the details provided in the legal notification, if any. Sometimes, authorities impose restrictions on the day of the assembly, which prevents the assembly from taking place at the intended time, or at the intended place, or according to the intended route. Police communication. We should pay attention to the interaction between the police and other actors at the assembly, including with organizers, stewards, participants, and counter-demonstrators. We should take note of how communication is used to facilitate the assembly, such as to give police orders, to provide information, or to de-escalate tensions. Facilitation of traffic. Police usually manage the traffic, and we should pay attention to the relationship between the assembly and the traffic. For instance, whether, when, and how roads are closed or vehicles allowed to proceed. Use of force. As discussed in Module 3, police use of force should only be applied when strictly necessary and to the extent required for the performance of the police duty. it is particularly important for monitors to describe any use of force in as much detail as possible, in order to be able to assess later whether such use of force is necessary and proportionate. For that purpose, it is important to note the time and location where the force is used, the type of force used, whether any prior warnings are given, and other circumstances regarding the use of force, including whether force is used in a targeted manner against an individual, or rather indiscriminately. Police equipment. The equipment police have on hand at the site of an assembly offers information about the police assessment of threats and risks associated with the assembly, as well as what tactics they are prepared to use to maintain public order. It is therefore important for us as monitors to record this equipment, which might include protective equipment, shields, helmets, vests, and protective body armor. The purpose of such equipment is to protect law enforcement officials and to decrease the need for using force. Barriers. The police might use a variety of barriers to limit or control the movement of assemblies, including by preventing access to certain areas, determining the route a march will take, separating opposing groups of protesters, or separating the gathering from law enforcement officials. Tactical options. It is also important to record the tactical options used by law enforcement during an assembly, such as containment, also called kettling. We should document any instances of kettling, namely the containment of a group of participants by cordons of police officers in order to prevent them from entering or leaving a certain area. The containment may not be used to prevent people from peacefully participating in an assembly and should only last for as long as strictly necessary. Arrests or detention. We should try to document the circumstances of arrest or detention of any assembly participants, bystanders, journalists, or monitors, if any. Take note of the information given by the police regarding the reason for the arrest, whether any force is used, and if so, how, as well as the conduct of the individual being arrested. Dispersal. Pay attention to any dispersal order given by the police, whether such orders are audible and otherwise clear and understandable, whether the consequences of non-compliance are made clear, and whether the warning is repeated. In addition, try to identify whether participants have sufficient time to comply with the dispersal order and whether dispersal is even possible. Also, we should take note whether any force is used in the process of dispersing people. Weapons. The use of weapons, as any other means of force, is subject to the strict requirements of necessity and proportionality. Any use of firearms constitutes potentially lethal force and therefore represents the highest level of force that can be used by the police. Firearms can be used only in case of an imminent threat to life. However, it is considered that the use of firearms is not part of the generally accepted tactical options that police have on its disposal to police assemblies, and less lethal weapons are often resorted to for crowd management purposes. However, the use and misuse of less lethal devices can have a particularly severe impact on certain vulnerable groups of individuals, such as children, pregnant women, persons with pre-existing medical conditions, and the elderly. For this purpose, we should always note down the circumstances of their use, their type, whether their use is preceded by an audible warning, if they are used on an individual target or indiscriminately, and whether vulnerable categories of individuals are affected. Some of the most common types of less lethal weapons used by the police include kinetic impact projectiles, water cannons, chemical irritants, acoustic devices, smoke grenades, electric shock weapons, and batons. Kinetic impact projectiles are used to incapacitate an individual. They are similar to conventional rounds of ammunition with a cartridge case, but when fired they propel a range of different projectiles at the target. The projectiles must not be fired randomly at the crowd, but instead must be aimed exclusively at persons who are engaged in violence against persons, and only when other means have failed to stop the violence. Water cannons are used to disperse a crowd or to limit access to an area by keeping crowds at a distance. Even when its use is directed at an individual, there is a high risk of affecting others in close proximity. Water jet can knock out a person, and when used in cold weather, water cannon can cause hypothermia or frostbite. Chemical irritants. Pepper spray is designed to subdue an individual who is causing a threat. It is an inflammatory agent causing burning pain and excess drainage from the eyes, mouth, and breathing passages. Tear gas is used to temporarily incapacitate a crowd and force them to disperse. It is an irritant agent causing pain and irritation of the nose, mouth, and breathing passages. Acoustic devices are equipment that emit sounds with high-pitched frequency to disperse crowds. They are normally stationed on top of a police vehicle and can look similar to satellite dishes. If used too close for too long or at too high a volume, they can cause damage to the eardrums and even hearing loss. Smoke grenades and stun grenades are used to disorient crowds by creating a cloud of smoke or loud explosion respectively. They are inherently indiscriminate, affecting all in the vicinity. Electric shock weapons, commonly referred to as tasers, are used to temporarily incapacitate a person. The electric shock is often deployed from a gun-like device stocked with a cartridge with a wire dart or barb to reach the targeted person. The shock and dart or barbs can cause pain, burns, puncture wounds, or scars. Batons are kinetic impact striking devices made of rubber, wood, plastic, or metal. They can be used defensively by the police officer or used to strike or threaten an individual or people. The use of batons by police in a coordinated, disciplined way can move or disperse violent participants in an assembly or protect individual police officers from attack. Nevertheless, they can also cause concussions, internal bleeding, and injury to organs. Even when the use of batons is justified, multiple strikes and especially beating could amount to excessive force. In addition to these, law enforcement in some states also use dogs and horses for crowd management. We should record their use in the context of assembly policing. Finally, we should note down any recording, surveillance, and interception technologies that police use during assemblies. There are many types of electronic surveillance and interception technologies used by law enforcement, including body-worn cameras, handheld video recorders or cameras, drones, signal jammers, which can sometimes unduly impact on the ability to organize and take part in assemblies. In this module, we introduced you to the observation indicators that need to be considered, noted, and recorded by monitors when observing an assembly. As a monitor, you should remember that these indicators consist of information pertaining to the general description of the assembly, the specific elements of the assembly, and the policing of the assembly. The purpose of recording this information is to enable you to reconstruct how the assembly unfolded when writing your assembly monitoring form after the event and analyzing your observations. If you are organizing or coordinating an assembly monitoring exercise, you should remind your monitors of these indicators during your pre-deployment briefing. You can ask them to list some indicators and then provide known information about these indicators in the context of the assembly you will observe, so the monitors can prepare better. You can also download the observation indicators sheet displayed on the screen for ease of reference. This sheet can also be found in the reading materials section of this module. In the next video, through a practical exercise, we will explain to you how to interpret what you observe as a monitor during an assembly.